Humanity Matters.
Welcome back here to Humanity TV with the fog of war and humanity itself. We just got done with the last couple of episodes speaking about Tom Spier and his military collection that focused on what we just saw on American military helmets from the air, land, and sea. Now we're going to kind of delve into the German helmets that would have faced the American soldiers, airmen, and naval personnel that were hitting Normandy Beach and the vicinity of it. So I have a helmet right in front of me. Now, Tom, what kind of helmet are we looking at in terms of the markings and the type of helmet?
Well, this specific helmet is a German model 1935 Luftwaffe Air Force helmet. It has the Luftwaffe eagle on the side, colors on the other side. I picked this up in Brooklyn maybe 30 years ago at a flea market. The thing that's interesting about this helmet, well, in essence, the Germans had three basic helmets during the Second World War. The first was a model 1935, the second was a model 1940, and the third was a model 1942. The Germans also utilized the helmets of many of the countries that they conquered. So they'd use like Dutch helmets. They put like a Luftschutz decal on it, or Czech helmets. So they basically used a whole bunch of helmets. But as far as the helmets that were really used by the Germans during World War II for their combat branches, M35, M40, M42. They also had what are called transitional helmets, which were World War I helmets, which had their liners replaced. The Germans also had made their own paratrooper helmets. I have one of those here. But this, as I said, is a M35 helmet. The helmet's interesting and it's easy to identify because, first of all, it has an air vent here, and this air vent is a separate piece. So they'd have the hole, and then they'd insert the vent in there, and they'd bend it on the other side so the vent would stay in there. And in addition, they had the rim of the helmet itself is rolled. It's a rolled rim helmet, so the edge of the helmet isn't sharp. So this is like the first, helmet that was used in the 1930s, or made by the Germans, model 1935, after the model, probably the 1917 or M18 helmets. It's a nice helmet. So the second one they would have used is what's called a model M40 helmet.
Now, if you look at both helmets, I would say that this one is probably a little bit heavier. Is there a reason?
I don't know. I don't know. One thing I'll say is that the German helmets they had multiple manufacturers. They had multiple sizes of the helmet shells, and they had multiple transfers or decals on the helmet. So I had a buddy of mine who had probably close to 1,500 German helmets. And to most people, they'd look the same, but to him, they were different because they were different sizes, different decals, different manufacturers of decals. It was really
Where
tremendous.
did he get those helmets itself?
He got them from other collections. I mean, some guys that they'll have a collection, they'll sell off the collection, or he'd get them from military shows, flea markets, anywhere he could get them.
Did he travel over to Europe at all, or was everything just here?
I think probably mostly here.
Wow.
But this helmet came out of Shoreham. This fellow, I think, had died, and I believe it was his wife who was clearing out the garage, and a neighbor of mine pulled this out of the garbage. This is maybe 40 years ago.
Wow.
But this is sort of interesting because you see the lines. It has like the camouflage paint on it, so it's unique in that way. Now this helmet is
that what those markings are? That was camouflage.
Yeah, this is
at one
camouflage.
point?
Yep, this paint is camouflage. This helmet is a model 1940 helmet, M40, and it's different from the M35 in that this little vent here. This isn't a separate piece. This is stamped in the steel. This helmet has the rolled rim that we spoke about before, that the rim isn't sharp. It's like that they roll the rim over. So the guys the Germans on the beaches of Normandy and inland, these are the two of the three type helmets that would be most commonly encountered.
Wow. And this is heavy too. So a lot of the movies that we see in documentaries, this would have been a pretty common.
Yep, this is what you're looking at. That's
pretty common
that specific
helmet.
one's an Air Force helmet, but I believe the Air Force had the the guns on the bring down aircraft. Maybe you can tell us a little about that.
Oh, in terms of
the German Air Force.
Oh, with the aircraft and then their German 88, right?
Yep.
So I mean, I'm just looking at this and it's just amazing. Now, would have this been seen in the movie Saving Private Ryan?
Probably,
right?
I mean, not that one because that was on my shelf.
No. But the design, though.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Out of the two helmets, which one would have probably been closer? Do you think?
Both,
huh?
Yeah, I mean, they're both just guys would independently camouflage their helmets. As I said, that's probably a unique thing. I can't imagine there are any two camouflage helmets exactly alike. Guys would put chicken wire on them. In your collection at the VFW, there's a bread band around one of them. Sometimes guys would put a wire around the helmet and then hook the wire onto the skirt of the helmet to put foliage.
Now, when you look at the helmets itself, and I don't know if it would be your research or just your experience purchasing them and finding out where they were from, it had to be somewhat easy for American soldiers to bring some of this stuff home with them.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep. A lot of these things were crushed up and disposed of after the war, sold for scrap. Some of them were utilized as colanders or scoops. So sometimes if you get on eBay, you'll see these things which were turned into farm implements, a helmet, as a scoop or a bucket. They would literally cut the skirts off the helmet and make them into pans and pots.
Amazing, right?
Yeah.
And what were your experiences of finding these helmets here? Did people have them in their garage or basements or attics? Or
I don't know. This one, as I said, this one came out of Brooklyn, and at a garage sale, I got it, and that one came out of my neighbor's garbage pail. This one may have been owned by a police officer who was assigned to the 7-2 precinct in Brooklyn, because when I bought it, there was a sort of a tray of like letters and things, and I wrote down his name, and I took a letter that had his name and address. So at some point, I may try to do a little research to find out where he was, because I'm sure it was a bringback.
So the helmet with the camouflage, you preserved some history.
Yeah.
That could have been a goner.
Yeah. Well, my neighbor grabbed it and gave it to me.
Yeah.
But that was literally going to end up in the town dump in Brookhaven.
And it's amazing how many stories where people say, "Get this out of the house. I don't want to look at this. This is garbage."
Yeah.
And they got rid of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think back then the thing really it's not in tremendous condition, and people don't really know that there are people like me and you who are interested in these things.
And trying to preserve the stuff.
And a lot of people have no interest. You and I are historically minded, and it interests us, but a lot of people have no interest.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, even though what these helmets represent in terms of pure evil when it comes to the Third Reich and Hitler and, just that mindset of we're just going to keep on fighting and prolonging the war and the Holocaust and everything else, it's still history. It's bad history, but it's still history.
You got to remember it.
Yeah, and here on Long Island, there was a lot of people who fought against that history and made sure that it was defeated. Now, here's your other helmet here.
Yeah, this is an interesting helmet. This is a German M42 helmet. This is a German Army helmet. You can see the transfer on it, the eagle, the swastika.
Yeah, you can see the difference, right, from the Luftwaffe helmet. That's here, right, with the eagle with its wings out, right, compared to.
As I said, there are dozens of different transfers. So there are guys who will collect different size helmets, different manufacturers' helmets, different transfers on the helmets. And one thing I'll say with the German helmets, you got to be really, really, really careful, because post-war guys would find transfers that hadn't been put on helmets. So you can have a helmet that is unissued or somewhat issued, and then you put a transfer on it, and it becomes something that it originally wasn't. It's an original transfer, an original helmet, but the helmet and the transfer aren't original to the helmet.
Now, when you look at the structure of these helmets, like you really presented like the American helmets, how they change, even down to like the inside parts, like the nuts and the bolts.
This is the final, essentially the final permutation of the German helmet. As far as what we just looked at, the M35 and the M40. This is an M42. So if you look at it, it has the punched out vent. But what's unusual about it is the rim is sharp. It's called a raw edge helmet. So this was to expedite and cheapen the manufacturing process. So you could stamp the thing out, cut it, I imagine, and you wouldn't roll in the rim. The liner is the same. It's made out of leather. There's a metal band to which it affixed. There are 3 split pins, so the liner can be easily replaced. And again, the helmet shells are different sizes, but the different size shells can accommodate different size liners within certain parameters.
Now, did the Germans change some of their helmets as the war went by, just like how the United States did?
Well, they cheapened the manufacturing process. So, as I said, in 1935, this was the model 1935. It had this vent that was a separate piece. In 1940, they cheapened the manufacturing process and they stamped the vent like this. And by 1942, they weren't rolling the rim anymore. So if you look at the rim of these 2 helmets, the one on my left hand is blunter than the one in the left, which is sharp because it's not rolled in. There's
now,
a little bit of a difference. You see the flare on the bottom?
When you say cheapen the manufacturing, right? Did they have to do that because they were putting more military in and they were fighting more and they were all over the place?
I imagine they just didn't want to spend the money.
Yeah, the resources,
It just makes it cheaper, and I can't imagine it has any impact on the utility or effectiveness of the helmet.
Okay.
Can I have that back?
Yeah,
one more time?
sure.
This is sort of neat. This is what like old collectors have told me. You know, if you want to look for a combat-worn helmet, look for a helmet with no paint on the top. So this is just steel right here, probably because guys would flip the helmet down on the ground.
And get a certain amount of wear and tear on it, right?
Yeah, sort of a neat helmet.
Do you have any idea? I mean,
no idea where that one came from.
But what numbers are we looking at that were probably made?
Imagine hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
This is a German. It's an M35 helmet, but it's really the camouflage cover that's interesting. The Germans used this is like an army cover. The material, I believe, is original material, but the cover itself was configured subsequent to the war. So it's not real, but it's a good example as to what an army camouflage cover looks like. The Waffen SS had different patterns, sort of like spots.
Does that look a little bit more similar to American helmets because that looks like American almost army camouflage a little bit there?
I mean,
or could you still see the distinct differences?
I can see the distinctness. I mean, I'm unaware of whether the Americans, actually it's not exactly true. During, a friend of mine was with the 509th Parachute Infantry Battalion in Belgium, and they cut bed sheets. I have pictures that he made. He had the guys cut bed sheets, and they utilized that as underneath the helmets. And I think they also used parachute canopy.
Wow.
And they also, the 509, some of the guys also camouflage their helmets with paints. But, you know, you look at the Pacific, in the Pacific, the guys were using camouflage covers as a matter of course.
Yeah.
At least as far as the Marine Corps went.
But you look at guys like from the 509th, they saw a lot of action, right? And they went right across Europe and made all those jumps. It's amazing. Now, talking about combat and air and jumping,
yeah,
this helmet definitely gets into that.
This one is I think it's a model. Let me look at my cheat sheet here. It's a model 37. The Germans had a bunch of different paratroop helmet models, but this is the most common one. And it had 4 straps originally, which here are the 2 in the front, and there are 2 in the back. They've been cut or maybe just deteriorated. It has a nice liner, and you're saying Max Schmeling.
Yeah,
right?
Schmeling. Yeah.
There's a picture of him wearing, I believe, the M37 model, but it's pretty rugged. Why don't you hand me one of the other German ones? I think the configuration of the shell is really basically the same. I think they just sort of trimmed them down. I'm not positive about that, but it's pretty darn close. You got to be careful with these because these helmets are faked, and there's some really good forgeries out there. So
Do you remember where you got that from?
I got this in Holland.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is a good one. But the cheap fakes, this thing has a rolled rim, and within the rolled rim there's a little line within the rim itself, and that's part of the manufacturing process. Some of the fakes don't have that rolled rim, so that's an easy way to distinguish them. But I'd be very apprehensive about buying one of these because they can be really magnificently reproduced. The other thing is the liner. I don't know if you can really see this, but the stitching between the 2 liner halves, it's like they're just like little lines going. It's not a zigzag pattern. It's like railroad ties, railroad stitching.
Now, when you were in Holland,
I believe that's how you say it. But
was there like an Army Navy store over there, or
it was
a
like a
museum
military
store?
shop, but this is probably 40 years ago. I'm sure it's real.
And were there a lot of other items that you could have purchased as well? I mean,
Yeah, I was always looking specifically for helmets.
for helmets there.
Yeah, but you have to be careful. Any of these German helmets or these American jump helmets, you got to be careful. I mean, I've never spent a huge sum of money on any of them.
Yeah, Joe Louis fought Max Schmeling. Joe Louis ends up going to Camp Upton and getting into the Army there, enlisting.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and you have Max Schmeling, the Aryan Superman, who I believe he saved 2 Jewish friends during Kristallnacht. He had to play that part in order to fight. And they basically said when he lost to Joe Louis that Hitler could no longer use him anymore. And he jumped on the Eastern Front. So here you got this big guy in unbelievable shape.
I had no idea.
Jumping on the Eastern Front with a helmet. It's exactly like this. And it's amazing. It's just something else. Now, was it hard bringing this back to the States when you came back?
No.
No Homeland Security, none of that, right?
No, this was back in the 80s.
Yeah.
I was excited to have that helmet. I had a reproduction, so it was nice to have a real one.
This is pretty heavy, but it's narrow, right? It doesn't seem like it's that big compared
small
to
size.
Small size.
I think when you look at a lot of airborne helmets, like the British and the American and the Italian airborne helmets, a lot of the smaller sizes have survived.
Now,
Because they probably the larger sizes were worn more and wore out and were ruined.
looking at the airborne helmets, right? We saw a couple of them today. Is there any one helmet that you look at and say, wow, this is a great helmet? Like this, like they got it right.
I think all the airborne helmets are pretty good, but this chin strap system of the German M37 and a couple of the British helmets that I have over there, I think are superior to the American system.
Okay.
Because they really grab your head. I mean, your head isn't popping out of there because there's like these four straps that hold your helmet in, your head in the helmet.
Now, the Germans, did they have adequate things here in terms of to give to their soldiers?
I think they had very good equipment. But again, they weren't using body armor. Again, it doesn't seem like any of the ground troops were really using body armor like they were started using in Korea and then Vietnam and thereafter.
And that could have cut down a lot of losses and everything else,
I wonder
right?
why they didn't use it. It's just maybe technology wasn't there. It was too heavy. I don't know.
Now, you have this helmet here. It's a little bit different than
this
the
is
American and the German.
Yeah, this is a French this is a French helmet. You can see the shape's different. This is why I started collecting helmets. I found it very interesting that the shapes of these helmets were all different, because you could look at the helmets and you can readily spot the differences. So this is what's called I believe a Model 26 helmet. French, it's very similar to the First World War pattern, but what they've done in 1926 is with the Model 1926, they had fewer pieces. So the First World War I helmet had a visor in the back, it had a visor in the front, and it had this top, which is sort of a vestige of the 1970s, the blunt sword blows. That's my take on it anyway. And it's also it's easy to identify, and it's a matter of national pride. And the French would put different badges on the helmets, like infantry, armor, artillery, whatever. So they're guys who will just collect French helmets with different badges, probably different manufacturers, different styles. And because we're talking about Normandy, I don't know how many French were fighting at Normandy, but I'm sure that
if they were coming ashore from England,
yeah.
Right?
But it's sort of a neat helmet, neat shape. This is a vent. The top has there's like a ventilation system, so the helmet breathes through the top, unlike the German helmets or the American helmets or than the tank helmet.
Now, I believe that the French had the largest army in the world on September 1st, 1939.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that they were actually ahead of the Germans. And you got to remember, during World War I, even though a third of the war was fought on their territory, they were pretty well equipped when the war started, but they fought, that phony war.
Yeah.
And then it was 6 weeks. So a lot of the Frenchmen probably had this on a shelf somewhere for a couple of years,
Sure.
right? Or under their stairs or something.
Absolutely.
And broke it out once the Germans fled from their towns and their areas, right? And would this be considered a matter of pride for the French itself there?
Absolutely. It wasn't until after World War II that they really changed the helmet. They went to a Otan, which looks similar to an American helmet. So you look at the guys in French Indochina, Dien Bien Phu, they're wearing something that looks similar to an American helmet.
Against the communists.
They stopped putting the top on it.
Now, what does the R and F mean?
I think it was the Republic of France.
Republic of France, yeah. Huh? Now, compared to some of the helmets that we spoke about today that we saw, is this manufactured better, or is
It feels a little lighter to me.
lighter?
One thing that's interesting is the lining system. I can't quite figure out this lining system, but it has these like three prongs.
But that's a pretty
Has,
narrow
like, the
helmet
sort
too,
of
right?
offered. Usually these things are, I don't know about this liner.
Yeah.
But it has these like three prongs here. So the liner sort of slides over the prongs. And, this is to prevent the blunt force trauma against the side of the head. So you look at the paratrooper helmets, you'll have like rubber or foam rubber or something in there. You look at the American helmets, it has to isolate it. So I don't really know how good this is. I mean, it seems to work okay. But one thing I was going to note, and maybe we'll do another episode.
Sure.
But when the Japanese left Thailand, they left their helmets behind. And the Thais, they pulled out the Japanese helmet liners, which consisted of a 3-pad leather stuffed pads system, and they replaced it with a French system. So they welded in, or they put these little springy things in there, and they put a French-type liner in it.
Wow.
It's sort of interesting how people sort of adopt other people's ideas. And
Is this a good way of looking at the French helmet? You look at the Germans are fighting, right, for the 6 years from 39 to 45. The Japanese are fighting for a long period of time. We are too. But the French were knocked out of the war. So they weren't necessarily making a lot of these changes, right? I mean, is that
I never thought of it.
Is that an interesting
That's
or
a great point.
Good angle of...
I mean, they must have felt the helmet was somewhat antiquated in order to replace it with the Otan.
But like the Vichy wasn't making too much of this stuff, and that was pretty limited. And the Germans weren't certainly saying, "Hey, we want you guys to have a better helmet," right? And
that's a great point,
right? I mean, compared to, even though the Germans are getting hit, bombed around the clock, they're still trying to make the helmet better for their soldiers. And we're looking at the war and expanding with it and making changes. The French were on the sidelines, right? And a lot of the stuff that they probably received was from us and the British and so on, right? In terms of the Free French.
It's a matter of national pride, the helmet.
Yeah.
It's a good-looking helmet.
Was this used in Dien Bien Phu in 1954?
I'm not sure. I think I recall seeing that Otan helmet. I have some data from the early 50s, I believe.
Because it's amazing that the French...
And they have I have paratrooper ones too, which have the sort of the 4 straps going in the back of the head and around.
Because it's amazing that the French could retain their colonies after the war, and they still held on to them, right, in North Africa and Southeast Asia and amongst other areas of the world. And they had to send those soldiers overseas like the British had to do in terms of, people going up against the colonialism. But this is...
Have you seen any of the guys wearing those in Vietnam, the French?
I
don't remember.
I don't think so. I think the helmet might have changed a little bit.
I think it was.
It might have been a little bit more
helmet.
American.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
It looked like Otan, yep.
But this could have been stuff that was left over there as well, that, who knows, maybe the Vietnamese was wearing, fighting against the, Japanese, that sort of thing. But yeah, this is an interesting helmet. It's just the design itself. It's just different.
I found the styles are so different. I mean, if you line up helmets, you have subtle differences like those German helmets, but then you have very pronounced differences between different nations and different times in different nations.
Okay. All right. So we're going to come back with Tom for a episode on the British military helmets during World War II that would have been used right around this time, 81 years ago.